This is nonsense. It's for children.
Rabbi?
First of all, it is interesting. I mean, Stephen Gould, who was, by the way, very sympathetic to religion and wrote a book called Rocks of Ages, which I also recommend to you, where he said that religion and science don't overlap.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel, and I hope your day is going great. Today, we are jumping into one of the most legendary clashes ever recorded between Christopher Hitchens and Rabbi Shmuley Boteach, where these two go head-to-head on free will, determinism, and whether you actually need God to make a real choice in life. And let me tell you, the moment Christopher drops the line that this whole framework is something written for children, you can feel the entire room shift. Stick with me all the way to the finish, because the back half of this exchange has some of the cleanest rhetorical moves I've seen in years, and I'll be breaking down exactly what makes them land so hard. Also, drop a quick comment letting me know what city or country you are tuning in from. I genuinely love seeing how far this channel reaches across the world. All right, let's get into it.
First of all, it's just not true that religions don't actually acknowledge very important things that happened before their own founding. Just read the beginning of the Bible, which goes back far beyond the founding of the Bible. But more important than that, there are actually things that if you are material, you can't give an accounting of. For example, you might not believe that you have free will. You might think that everything you do was predetermined from the beginning of the Big Bang. And just the fact, by the way, that all of the universe, physics tells us, came from something tinier than the head of a pin is, to me, there is no word other than miraculous for it. But
okay, so right out of the gate, Shmuley walks into one of the oldest traps in religious apologetics, and you can almost see Christopher waiting for it. Shmuley basically says, look, if you don't have God, you don't have free will. He literally puts it like this: I don't understand how you get free will if you don't have God. And Christopher's response is one word that I think completely captures the mood of every atheist watching this. He just says, pathetic. And honestly, that reaction is earned. Because what Shmuley is doing here is something I see constantly from religious apologists. They take a genuinely interesting philosophical question, free will versus determinism, and they smuggle God in through the back door as if he's the only possible answer. As if science just throws its hands up and goes, oh no, we have no idea. Better call the rabbi. But here's the part that blows my mind. Christopher doesn't just dismiss it, he actually gives Shmuley a real answer. He brings up Stephen Jay Gould and the Burgess Shale. He explains how if you rewound the tape of evolution and pressed play again, you would get a completely different result every single time. And then he says it plainly, there's nothing predetermined, there's nothing deterministic about this at all. You have to understand why that matters. Shmuley's entire setup depends on the audience believing that a materialist worldview means everything is locked in from the Big Bang. But that's just not how modern biology works. Random mutation, natural selection, contingency, environmental pressure, all of it produces outcomes nobody could have predicted in advance. And here's the kicker. Christopher closes this stretch by calling out the absolute audacity of religious texts. He talks about the incantations of Genesis, where the supposed authors claim to know the divinity, the creator, on personal terms. That line is doing a lot of heavy lifting. Because think about what he's actually pointing out. A handful of ancient writers sat down and claimed they had insider access to the mind of the being who created the universe. Not a glimpse, not a feeling, a personal relationship. That's the part nobody wants to address. The confidence is wild.
This is nonsense. It's for children.
Rabbi?
First of all, it is interesting. I mean, Stephen Gould, who was, by the way, very sympathetic to religion and wrote a book called Rocks of Ages, which I also recommend to you, where he said that religion and science don't overlap.
They sure do.
But wait 1 second. If you read his book on the Burgess Shale, he does say if you rewind, then you assume if you push play again, you would get a different result. And that's certainly true unless the result was intended. But more important than that, yes, there's randomness in the system. Nobody would argue that there isn't randomness in the system. But randomness isn't free will. Randomness is getting a result you don't expect. The question is, how do you get a directed choice, which isn't random? I choose right now to pick this glass up. Now, how did I make that choice? If I'm purely a product of my DNA and my environment, then it's not a choice. Then it was programmed in, then it's instinct. And the whole point that religions always made about instinct was that human beings can rise above it.
And this is the moment, this right here, when Christopher looks at Shmuley and says, "This is nonsense. It's for children, Rabbi." I want you to sit with that for a second, because that line is not just a clapback. That's a thesis statement. That's Christopher saying the entire framework you're building your argument on is something a 5-year-old could see through if they weren't trained their whole life to accept it. And then he does something I genuinely think is one of the most underrated rhetorical moves in any debate. He doesn't just attack. He cites Stephen Gould, who was, in his own words, very sympathetic to religion. Why does that matter? Because Christopher is taking away Shmuley's escape route. He's saying you can't dismiss this guy as some angry atheist. This is a scientist who actually had a soft spot for faith. And even he said the rewind argument proves randomness, not design. That's chess, not checkers. Then Shmuley pivots, and this is where I think he genuinely loses the philosophical thread. He goes, if I'm pure a product of my DNA and my environment, then it's not a choice, then it was programmed in, then it's instinct. And he thinks he's making a profound point, but he's actually just restating the question and pretending it's an answer. Here's what people don't realize. The free will problem is hard for everyone. It's hard for atheists. It's hard for neuroscientists. It's hard for philosophers who've spent their entire lives on it. Nobody has fully solved it. But the move Shmuley makes, which is to say, well, since science can't fully explain it, the answer must be God. That's not philosophy. That's what's called a God of the gaps argument, and it's been getting smaller for centuries. Let me break this down for you historically. Lightning used to be Zeus. Plagues used to be divine punishment. Mental illness used to be demonic possession. Every single time science finally explained one of those things, the gap where God lived shrank a little more. So when Shmuley plants his flag on free will and says, "Aha, science can't explain this, therefore, God, all he's really doing is pointing at the next gap that's eventually going to close." And Christopher just nails the closing thought of this stretch. He says to claim we have free will because the boss says we've got it is to make a mockery of the whole concept. That's surgical. Because if your freedom only exists because some cosmic authority hands it to you, that's not freedom. That's permission.
And it's also to invite the question, what kind of tyranny is this that you want? You want an all-supervising, all-deciding person. I ask you first, what sources of information do you have about this person's existence that I don't have, that are denied to me? I'd like to know. And second, why do you want it? Why do you want to arrive at a terminus of unfreedom where there is a celestial authority upon whom all things depend and from which all things flow? Why do you want that, and how on earth do you know that there's any case to be made for its existence?
Yes,
Want me to answer
please.
that?
That's a
Oh,
good question.
I don't think that's a terminus of unfreedom.
I think
actually
you're only
that-
free when you've declared against it, frankly. That's the beginning of freedom, is the emancipation
Is
from
that the coda to the
tyranny,
question?
the tyranny of theocracy, yes.
I actually think that the whole point that I was making was that a belief in a God who creates you is what gives you free will, and that without it, you have to fall into a determinism. And by the way, you may think that science gives it to you, but every scientist I've asked on this question, including David Barash, who's an evolutionary biologist, says that it, and Steven Pinker had the same reaction, is that it is more or less a commonplace of modern science, that determinism is the only worldview that's consistent with an understanding of the way science works.
Now, this is where Christopher goes full philosopher mode, and I genuinely think this stretch is one of the most underrated arguments against theism ever delivered on a debate stage. He looks at Shmuley and asks, what kind of tyranny is this that you want? You want an all-supervising, all-deciding person. That question right there should stop every religious viewer in their tracks because it inverts the entire pitch of religion. The pitch is always, God loves you, God watches over you, God has a plan. But Christopher is asking, why do you want that? Why do you want to live in a universe where there's a celestial authority who knows your thoughts, monitors your behavior, and decides your eternal fate? That's not love. In any other context, we would call that surveillance. And then he delivers the line that should be on a poster somewhere. He says the beginning of freedom is the emancipation from the tyranny of theocracy. That's not just a clever sentence. That's centuries of Enlightenment philosophy compressed into 10 seconds. Real autonomy starts the moment you stop accepting that some unseen authority gets to dictate what you think, what you wear, who you love, and what you can question. But the best part of this whole stretch, the part I keep replaying, is what Shmuley accidentally hands him. Shmuley is trying to defend his position, and he says it. He says, you're granted freedom. And Christopher's brain lights up because he caught it in real time. He goes, granted, you've made my point. Thank you for making me free. That word, granted, exposes the entire problem with religious framing of freedom. If your liberty is granted to you by an authority, that authority can also revoke it. That's not freedom. That's a permission slip. And Shmuley, in trying to defend the gift, accidentally proved Christopher's whole argument that religion offers a pretend version of autonomy that depends entirely on the mood of the giver. And just when you think Shmuley might recover, Christopher closes with Einstein. He says Einstein noted that the miraculous thing about the laws of nature is they're never suspended. That's what makes them remarkable. They are immutable. But religion, Christopher points out, depends on the idea that those laws can be suspended whenever a miracle is needed for narrative purposes. And Shmuley's only response is, well, depends who you ask. That's not a rebuttal. That's a white flag. Here's the part I want you to take away. This whole exchange is a masterclass in why the religious framework keeps shrinking. Every time someone tries to plant a flag on a question science hasn't fully answered yet, somebody like Christopher comes along and asks the harder question, the one religion can't answer at all. Why do you want this to be true? And nobody on that side has ever had a good answer. So what do you guys think of this? Leave your thoughts down in the comments. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.